Support for Trifles comes from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon and Substack. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/trifles and at trifles.substack.com. And now you can enjoy some Trifles swag, mugs, notepads, and oval stickers, available in our store. Find it at ihearofsherlock.com/merchandise.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the stone was Mazarin, the carbuncle was blue, and the mane was lion, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about what kind of chemistry experiments Sherlock Holmes was running? Or what a yeggman is? Or why Holmes's index was sorted haphazardly?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 466. Who wrote the American chapters of A Study in Scarlet? Hello there, and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, who wrote? Well, I don't know who killed Cock Robin.
Who wrote the Book of Love? That's what I want to know.
Cock Robin.
Oh, really? Isn't he the one that robs from the poor and gives to the rich? No, wait a minute. That's the U.S. government. Sorry.
That's the Scarlet Pumpernickel.
Scarlet Pumpernickel.
Pimpernel. Yeah, one of those.
Easy for you to say.
That's what you say. Well, this is Trifles. It's the first of the month, and that means we are getting to a Morley-Montgomery Award winning article. Every month, we try to highlight one of the classic pieces of Sherlockiana that has stood out to the judges over the course of the year. Morley-Montgomery, of course, refers to Christopher Morley and James Montgomery, two early stalwarts of the Baker Street Irregulars and great Sherlockian scholars of their own right. So, as you would expect, they were honored with the Morley-Montgomery Award being memorialized for them. And every year, a panel of judges picks the best article from the Baker Street Journal. You can subscribe to the Baker Street Journal, by the way. You don't have to be an irregular. Anybody can subscribe. Just go to bakerstreetirregulars.com and check it out. Tell them we sent you. I don't know if there's a Trifles discount there yet, but there should be. Hint. We no longer have them as a sponsor, so you would think that's the least they could do for us. But this is our chance to talk with you about this particular article. Just a reminder, too, we do have merchandise available. If you'd like a Trifles mug or a Trifles notepad or a 221B oval sticker or 1895 oval sticker, those are available at our merch store. You can find them at ihearofsherlock.com/merchandise. And it's also on our navigation bar there, so you can check that out. But it could be a great gift for the Sherlockian in your life. Maybe for yourself to congratulate yourself through sitting through so many episodes with us. It's the least you can do. Pour some scotch in there and dull the pain. And if you don't feel like shopping, that's okay. You can support us at patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com. You can choose the amount that works for you based on those two platforms. You'll get ad-free shows, and you will have the opportunity to listen to occasional, what do we call it, bonus material. And we have our monthly Trifling Trifles episode, which looks like, wow, this is December. We've got another one to drop.
Hooray!
Goodness, we better get on that. So all of that is available and more if you sign up at Patreon or Substack. Links are in the show notes, and we thank you in advance. But woe unto him that has given the law, yea, that has all the commandments of God like unto us, and that transgresseth from them, and that wasteth the days of his probation, for awful is his state. That is from the Book of Mormon, not the Broadway show, the actual book from 2 Nephi. Is that the second book of Nephi?
I don't know.
I don't either. It shows you how not well versed in Mormon I am. But that is the opening of Ben Vizoskie's article, Who Wrote the American Chapters of A Study in Scarlet. My goodness. This is from 2000, is that right?
Yes, volume 50, number 2 of the Baker Street Journal.
Goodness. And before we went on the air, I mentioned that I witnessed Ben Vizoskie, BSI, give this as a paper at Autumn in Baker Street in the late 1990s. And he must have refined it and submitted it to the Baker Street Journal for official publication. And that's why we're here to discuss this article.
And it won an award, obviously, the Morley-Montgomery Award. Ben begins with a question that over the years, as we have talked, you and I, to Sherlockians around the world, there is this constant theme that comes up, I would say, maybe 70% of the time in these kinds of conversations when you talk to people about their first encounters with Sherlock Holmes, and that is the mystery of A Study in Scarlet, when 1 minute you are in London in Baker Street and you turn the page and amazingly you seem to be someplace else. And that's really where Ben begins. He says, were you confused when you were reading Study in Scarlet and you reached chapter 8? The first 7 chapters take place in London in 1881 and end with the capture of Jefferson Hope. But chapters 8 through 12 are a flashback to events many years earlier in America, culminating in Hope's arrival in London. Chapters 13 and 14 continue where the 7th chapter left off. The first of these concluding chapters is essentially the old hunter's own account, his statement to the police of his activities in London, and the other is primarily Holmes's explanation of the case. So, look, while putting all of that aside, who wrote those chapters? Well, you may be tempted to say that Watson wrote them, but how could he have known what had happened in America 20 or 25 years, 35 years earlier? He might have had the story from Jefferson Hope, but the rest of Watson's narrative makes clear he never spoke to Hope about his life in America. And why would Watson refer to his own journal if it was written by someone else? Because he does this in the last sentence of chapter 12. In chapter 12 of A Study in Scarlet, the last sentence says, as to what occurred there, meaning London, we cannot do better than quote the old hunter's own account, that's Jefferson Hope's own account, as duly recorded in Dr. Watson's journal, to which we are already under such obligations. That sentence implies Watson was not the author of these chapters, but who else could have written them?
Who indeed? Well, fortunately, we don't have to cast the net very far. Ben says the obvious alternative is the literary agent. That's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Or of course, he was just Arthur Conan Doyle at the time. We know that Doyle was a devotee of historical fiction. He'd even written some himself. And maybe he fashioned a fictional life history for Jefferson Hope and inserted it into Watson's narrative. But Ben says there's a good reason to doubt this, too. The story rings true, but there's all kinds of inaccuracies that if you're considered a decent author of historical fiction, you may have avoided that. So we have that first American chapter. It sets us in the Great Akalai Plain, an arid and repulsive desert stretching from the Sierra Nevada to Nebraska, from the Yellowstone River in the north to the Colorado River on the south. Well, when you look at that narration, the Great Akalai Plain would seem to cover Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, parts of Colorado, Montana, Idaho, and even in 1847, this was not the region of desolation and silence that's portrayed. It's it would also include the Rocky Mountains, which doesn't really sound like a Great Akalai Plain to me. So Ben says clearly there's a problem with this description of the scene. From the rest of the story, you see that the setting was really in the Great Basin of Utah and Nevada. And he says, we'll get back to that later, but now we want to assume that the Great Akalai Plain is the Great Basin.
Yeah, and Ben takes us then through some of the descriptive points about the surround and the events. And he finds lots of inconsistencies in the geography, but also in the people. The Native Americans, the Pawnees or the Blackfeet are mentioned, but that doesn't track, says Ben, with the actual tribes who were present in that region and their location. And then he takes us to the facts concerning John and Lucy Ferrier, who were rescued, according to this, on the 4th of May, 1847, by a band of 10,000 persecuted Mormons following Brigham Young to the Promised Land. Some of this is true, some false, some in between. The Mormons had been persecuted. In 1844, Joseph Smith, founder and leader of the Mormons, was murdered by a mob in Illinois. The center of the Mormon church was in Nauvoo, Illinois, where many Mormons had gathered after being driven out of Ohio and Missouri. And then Ben takes us through some of the Mormon history, Brigham Young assuming the leadership, and his travels, the real Brigham Young leading the first company out of winter quarters, traveling on the north bank of the Platte River, and who was with him and where the group was. And reminds us that when John and Lucy Ferrier were rescued, one of the young men told them, quote, "We are the persecuted children of God, the chosen of the angel Moroni. We are of those who believe in those sacred writings drawn in Egyptian letters on plates of beaten gold, which were handed unto the holy Joseph Smith at Palmyra." John was then brought before Brigham Young, who is described, in a generally accurate way. But, says Ben, the angel of the Mormons is Moroni, not Moroni, Merona, M-O-R-O-N-I, not M-E-R-O-N-A. And the rest is a matter of Mormon history, except for what it says here about Brigham Young's age. Brigham Young was actually 46 years old, not 30. And then, Ben says the story... So
he was Brigham middle age?
Right. Yeah. And then Ben says, the story jumps then to 1859, and we have gold fever in California. And he takes us through a variety of errors here. And then he says one last error. After the failed escape and Lucy's death, Jefferson Hope tries to take revenge on Drebber and Stangerson. And when he's thwarted, he reluctantly goes back to the mines. And when he does that, it's nearly 5 years before he returns and finds that there had been a schism among the chosen people a few months before, during which his prey left Utah. Well, once again, says Ben, this isn't right. John Ferrier was killed in August 1860. So Hope would have gone back to the mines in 1861, which would date the schism to 1866. And so lots of inconsistencies and errors here.
Yeah, he says the schism happened in the 1860s, first by the Morrisites, led by Joseph Morris in 1862, and that's too early. And the other was the Godbeites, led by merchant William S. Godbey. And as any good religious group will eventually find out, there's greed behind all of it. And that seems to have been the motivation behind the formation of that group. And that would seem to be perfectly scripted for the likes of Drebber and Stangerson. But the Godbeites didn't break from the church until 1868. And Hope must have been absent for then 7 years. So Ben says if Doyle had written these chapters to insert them in Watson's narrative, well, he would have checked those historical details and would have been more accurate about them. So what else are we left with as far as possibilities? Well, could it have come from Jefferson Hope? It's you've got the inaccurate geographical description. That could have come from Hope. He described it as he knew it visually. And, of course, before 1868, Nebraska wasn't a state. It was a territory. And as a guy who was familiar with the area around that time, he would have thought of that wider geographical area simply as Nebraska, and the Yellowstone River would be part of it. If somebody was in Utah and thought the area of the headquarters of the Yellowstone were a convenient northern boundary for the Great Akalai Plain, well, that would make a lot of sense. So, not going on any kind of specific maps, but as we know Jefferson Hope, a hunter of the land, somebody who followed his instincts, he was going by estimation with all of these. So, in addition, the error in the rescue date, he said this could be because Hope got it wrong from John or Lucy Ferrier, or maybe he simply misremembered it. The Brigham Young wagon train, well, that may have been embellished, exaggerated over the years. The band consisted of 148 people. About 10,000 followers did follow the trail over the next 3 years, and that was a nearly constant stream except for the winter months. So, over 12 years, as Jefferson Hope was working on this story, he may have told it, retold it, thought about it different ways, and may have moved it away from reality to legend at some point.
Well, I'd just like to point out to our listeners that obviously you can tell how much Ben has researched and written and thought about the actual history of these events. And that's something fundamental to this sort of Sherlockian scholarship. I mean, after all, the great game is all about imagining and considering and taking the point of view that Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are real people. And therefore, these are real events. And so when you find these inconsistencies, particularly with the presence of this big section and a study in Scarlet, this is fodder for a terrific paper like this. And we are about, 5 pages in. And now Ben gets to the heart of it. He says, so, look, who wrote this anyway? Here's how I believe chapters 7 through 12 came to be written. Imagine the young Dr. Watson taking his manuscript to Arthur Conan Doyle. In it, Watson tells the story in 9 chapters of the capture of Jefferson Hope by Sherlock Holmes. Doyle recognizes the potential value of a story about the mysterious detective whose name is being whispered around London, but he sees the story as incomplete, so he agrees to act as Watson's literary agent on the condition that Watson flesh out the history of Hope and the Ferriers. Holmes, when he learns about this from Watson, is appalled. Well, it's bad enough that Watson insists on romanticizing his exploits, fictionalizing them. Even the parts in which he's not directly involved is unthinkable. And Holmes may well have thought that Watson lacked the imagination necessary to write fiction. But he doesn't want to lose Watson's assistance, so he comes to Watson's aid. He finds Jefferson Hope's friend and accomplice, the person who tricked Holmes and retrieved the wedding ring, about whom we have learned nothing. And this person tells Watson the story. Unfortunately, some of the details are not as fresh as when Hope told him the story 6 years earlier. He doesn't remember the dates too well, and one Indian tribe is the same as another, and he jumbles Hope's description of Salt Lake City in 1859, and he misnames the angel Moroni, or maybe this was a typesetter's error, as it was corrected in later editions. Watson records the story as it's told to him and takes these new chapters to Doyle, and Doyle offers to incorporate the 5 new chapters into the original 9. Watson, who's busy with his practice and Holmes's cases, agrees.
And Ben tells us because he had been working on this. Remember, I said I saw this presented at Autumn in Baker Street, and then it must have been 3 years later or so that it made its appearance in the Baker Street Journal. He said, since I first wrote on this topic, I found one most convincing piece of evidence that supports this theory. I've been able to determine the real meaning of the sign and the countersign used by the Danites while they kept watch on the Ferriers and Jefferson Hope. They were fleeing from Salt Lake City, remember, and Hope and the Ferriers overheard one party of the Danites issue a challenge, and this was reported by Watson to have been 9-7, and then the response 7-5. 9-7, 7-5. And just as an aside, this would be where your adolescent would throw in 6-7. Now, Ben says at first glance these would seem to be the result of the fevered brain of some hack novelist. But he said, let's imagine ourselves in the time when this occurred. The Danites were meeting to talk about the continuing problem of the Ferriers. And one of them summarizes it, Ferrier, who they had rescued in the desert, and then they made him part of their community, had been told that his daughter had to marry one of the young generation of Mormons. Take your pick, Trevor or Staggerson. And he had 30 days to decide between them. But during this period, he refused to allow his daughter to speak to them, and even chased the candidates from his house. 28 days of his 30-day probation had passed, and he was reminded daily of the passage of time. Now, another Mormon then relates how Ferrier's been turning some of his assets into cash, and suggests that they might be planning to flee, Ferrier and his daughter Lucy. And they decide to put sentries on the trails, right, to just kind of scope out the area to prevent him from getting too far off of the reservation, so to speak. And one of them looks to the scriptures for an appropriate phrase. He suggests, "But woe unto him that has the law given, yea, that has all the commandments of God like unto us, and that transgresseth them, and that wasteth the days of his probation, for awful is his state." That was the quote we opened with. Well, they agree that's appropriate, and the fanatic offers a countersign. "For if this people had not fallen into transgression, the Lord would not have suffered that this great evil should come upon them." And again, they thought that was an appropriate response. Well, Ben has located where these phrases came from. The second book of Nephi, chapter 9, verse 27. And the second quote comes from the book of Mosiah, chapter 7, verse 25. And in actuality, they're changed slightly because it's too difficult to whisper 20-something. So what you hear is 2 Nephi 9:2-7, answered by Mosiah 7:2-5. 9-7, 7-5. How do you like that?
Fabulous. And the accomplice years later would have remembered only the numbers, and someplace along the chain from the Danites through Hope, through his accomplice, and finally to Watson, each one only hearing it, the number 2 was transformed to its homonym, the word 2, T-O. 9-7, 7-5. This leaves room for only one objection. What about the quote, that sentence? Why would Watson write, as to what occurred there, we cannot do better than quote the old hunter's own account, as duly recorded in Dr. Watson's journal, to which we are already under such obligations? Well, says Ben, the answer is Watson didn't write that sentence.
What?
After Watson agreed to let his literary agent incorporate the 5 new chapters into the original 9, Doyle rather artlessly inserted them after Chapter 7 and added one sentence of his own to serve as a transition back to Watson's concluding chapters. That one sentence made it appear that the whole story was written by someone other than Watson.
So, does that mean it was artless Conan Doyle?
Sir Artless Conan Doyle? No.
Well, Ben's conclusion is the inevitable, that A Study in Scarlet was written by Watson, except for the last sentence of Chapter 12. 9 chapters were written from Watson's direct experience, and most of the American chapters were composed from information supplied by Hope's accomplice. That one sentence at the end of Chapter 12 was contributed by Doyle, but with that one sentence, he managed in the minds of some poor misguided souls to attach his name to the entire canon. Well, that was a workmanlike piece of scholarship.
Yeah. Isn't that it's an outstandingly well thought through paper. Yeah.
And I'm surprised it took that long to determine those phrases from the Book of Mormon, where they originated from and what their numbers were. But that's really, to me, that's the clincher there, is the 927 and 725.
Yeah. And just think, listeners, it's just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Now, you know what the angel Moroni used to say to people? It was a vengeful angel. I don't know if you're aware of this. One of the avenging angels, the angel Moroni, used to say,
Roman Moroni never forget a bargain face, kid. I get you.